Witcher 3 is one of the most critically praised games of the last generation. In this review, all the elements I talk about or criticize are all relevant elements with significant impact on the gaming experience. So I'm not nitpicking when I say that I am one of the smaller minority of people who don't like Witcher 3 that much, who thinks it is one of the most overrated game of the last generation. Let's talk about the combat first. Witcher 3 combat has all the right elements tuned up in a wrong way. Even though there is block and counter, the player is highly dependent upon the dodge mechanics, which is the single most important mechanic in combat. Most of the time I feel like a rabbit hopping away from the enemies. A badass master witcher like Geralt should not run away from enemies. He should fight it head on. The combat is tuned up in such a way that it is nearly impossible to get yourself in the middle of enemies and finish them up in a badass way. Also, the dodging is also not that satisfying. A recurring issue with the gameplay is that things which are difficult do not have a high reward. The counter mechanics is significantly riskier than dodge, but doesn't have the proportionate reward it should have. Dodging is significantly easier and provides the same level of offensive advantage and power as a counter attack. So no one bothers mastering the counter attack. The same situation persists with the blocking. You would never find yourself cornered in such a way that which prevents you from executing a dodge, which is easier and more profitable and far riskier and far less riskier than blocking. All you need to master in the combat in this game is dodge, and it doesn't take much time to do so. Dodging doesn't take up much stamina too. You could keep spamming without any repercussions. Stamina conservation and management is a great way to add depth to the combat and makes it more fun. Witcher 3 has this, but is tuned up in such a way that it does not have any effects at all. Only in the higher difficulties, like the highest difficulties, there's some form of effect, but not that much. The combat has everything you could ask for. A fast attack, a strong attack, dodge, longer dodge, stamina bar, another adrenaline bar which acts as a combo meter, and an additional stamina bar later, and a toxicity bar which you need to manage. There are so many systems, but the bad tuning ruins all of it. These issues are present and remains the same in higher difficulties too. The adrenaline bar, which works as a combo meter, which in most other games add a depth of layer and difficulty, can easily be ignored in Witcher 3. The effect of the adrenaline bar is unnoticeable. It's so irrelevant that it does not need to be added. And if it is added, it needs to be tuned up in such a way that it feels relevant. Games like Devil May Cry thrive on using combo meter, but in Witcher 3, this is just another element of wasted potential. Even some kinds of visual indicator which was much more noticeable would have added some fun into it. Stamina conservation needs to be more important if the combat aims to be much more fun. The way to make something in a game fun is by forcing the brain to calculate or think of solving an issue. This is not present in Witcher 3's stamina conservation mechanics. The whirlwind and rend mechanics should have been introduced much earlier in the game. It would have added more depth and style to the combat. If someone told me about the combat system with light and strong attacks, dodge and longer dodge, stamina bar, toxicity bar, etc., it would seem to me like a picture perfect, like good on paper type of combat system in a fantasy RPG game. Witcher 3, despite having all of this, falls incredibly short in properly implementing these mechanics. If a combat does not have the depth, it should have been at least be difficult. Anyone can master dodge mechanics fairly quickly, even on blood and broken bones difficulty. The sword, which for any fantasy lovers is the most interesting elements, looks and feel like a long needles. The slashing is not satisfying at all. It feels as if the enemy is being scratched by the tip of the sword. Because of the distance of the camera from Geralt, it also not possible to admire the sword while also playing them. Also, most of them don't feel like enough to feel like a powerful sword. It does not have much of a weight. The runes are a switch off in about 2 seconds after drawing in the sword, so there's always that too. The combat mechanics are varied but ultimately useless. All you need to master is dodging and the block and the counter mechanics. Even though it is difficult to pull it off, does not have the proportionate reward something difficult should have. The dodging mechanics does not require much timing. So in effect, the combat of The Witcher 3 should make you feel like a badass sword master, like Geralt supposed to be. Instead, you feel like a coward who always trying to get the hell out of the way. However, there is the whirlwind mechanic who should have been introduced much earlier in the game, which is satisfying and rewarding and makes you feel like a badass witcher, which is gracefully dancing around his enemies and slicing them gracefully. Also, the whirlwind is also very cool to look at. However, it should have been at least taken 20 hours to unlock it if you're playing the game on a proper open world RPGs. The sword enchantment archive by placing ruins on sword is very much unreliable due to them being probability based. They only works once or twice, say in 5 fights, and in majority of the fights you do not get to experience them. Let's talk about the RPG mechanics. The progression in this game is the most lame, uninteresting progression system I've ever seen in a highly acclaimed RPG. A good skill tree should make you feel torn between two good upgrades. Instead, in Witcher 3, I am torn between two seemingly useless and uninteresting upgrade systems, which are all percentage based, which are very hard to notice during gameplay. The primary modes of offense in this game is the melee combat. Magic and alchemy works as a secondary trait, which are useless without the sword play. The problem is that magic and alchemy are on par with the fighting skill tree in terms of importance. This makes it impossible to invest in alchemy or magic without neglecting the sword play, which you cannot neglect. What they should have done is to separate the melee combat skill tree with the magic and the alchemy. The choice should have been alchemy and magic, because you can survive by using magic and alchemy in the place of other. Therefore, the choice should be about combat and magic or combat and alchemy, not combat or magic or alchemy. That way you can roleplay perfectly as a witcher who uses the magic or a witcher who uses the alchemy. Another issue of the progression skill is that most of the upgrades you unlock cannot be experienced in the gameplay. It does not feel like making it any difference, even though it probably is. Some of the skills are quite cool, but they are very low in numbers and takes time to unlock. The next issue is the weapon collection. Even though Witcher 3 has a large but balanced collection of swords, it cannot be enjoyed without sacrificing power. In the introductory sequence, if you dare to explore a little bit, you will run into instructions to make the Viper sword set, which cannot be matched in power by most of the sword you find at least until level 15. So you cannot use all the better looking swords which you find until then. The same issue with the armor set, which you will rarely see an armor that matches the default Witcher armor in style. The enemy variety in this game is one of its better moments and better qualities. The game has wide collection of monsters of nearly every type imaginable with their own weakness, strength and similarities. Even though every monster has a section in their bestiary, there are specific weaknesses and behaviors which you learn directly from the experience. The rot fiend would explode when it almost dead, so you should clear it off from its vicinity. That goes for every single monster. There is always something going on in every single enemy types in this game. Each have its weaknesses and strengths. Although Witcher has many issues with this gameplay, it definitely sets the benchmark for enemy variety, which may not sound much but is of highest importance in a game about professional monster hunter, and especially for a game that lasts about 150 hours long. For years, RPG games have been searching for much realistic way to implement player experience. In Witcher 3, the experience isn't implemented only on numbers, which improves your effectiveness. The real experience is required to become a master monster hunter. You need to hands-on experience on fighting the monsters to effectively defeat them. You need to observe and understand their behaviors. The bestiary just provides the basic info for your bare survivor. So I like it. It's one of the best stuff in this game. Witcher 3 is a game with massive hidden potential. All the bombs in this game look damn awesome. Some of the bombs can be chained up with other bombs and spells to create a satisfying combination of explosions. But the problem with the gameplay rarely demands it. There are several slow motion moves in this game. The best one, which are of series powers, and the other one is Geralt's finisher, is certain alchemy power which enables the slow-mo when the enemy encounters, all of which are very cool to look at. The slow motion effect of series moves is the best looking I've ever seen in this game, and this particular moves, which enables series to attack multiple opponents at the same time with a time manipulation, is the single best move of this game. Witcher 3 also has a problem of not delivering some of its promises in its gameplay. There should be elements of preparation that go into facing difficult enemies, but by at least 10 hours into the game, you get most of the things you rarely find in the gameplay department. You've seen almost everything in terms of gameplay mechanics. The next element is the unnecessarily vastness, the emptiness, and the lack of diversity in the open world. There is no such thing in the lay of the land when talking about the open world. Most of the places almost looks the same, and there is a huge lack of direction when moving forward. It is heavily dependent on minimap, which takes away from the immersion and prevents the player from properly enjoying the scenery. You cannot look at the scenery if you constantly looking at the minimap to move around. You will not get a general idea of where you are, and you rarely ever encounter something that genuinely surprises you when you out there exploring the open world. All in all, I am extremely disappointed with this game. There are some very strong elements in this game that I really did like the enemy variety, the combat encounters, and there are some fun little mechanics that are implemented in this game that are very good ideas but are not well executed. So I hope that in the next game they improve upon it. That's it for today's video. In the next video, I'll be talking about the RPG elements of Witcher 3 in terms of its choices. So check out for that video. In this section, I'll be talking about one of the most praised aspects of Witcher 3, which is choices and consequences. Witcher 3 has been praised a lot for the way player choice is reflected in the world. It is quite awesome when the effects of an action are reflected in the game's world, which will make the world seem alive and functional. However, there has a catch to it. Let me ask an important question. Why would anyone find the concept of choice attractive? I believe it is because we would like to have certain level of control over the elements that governs our life. I also believe this is same for every sphere in life, including video games. Does the choices in Witcher 3 offers the level of control? I would say no. The choices in The Witcher 3 are more of a dice roll than an actual choice. The player cannot hope to have a control over stuff that is happening, which takes away the true joy of having a choice. In life, say you're given a choice of choosing a career. You like a choice as much as this able to choose your future, not because you want to see the butterfly effect and land in a career you don't like. I admit choices which reflects on the world does make the world much more alive. But in the process, it completely takes away the concept of choice. A choice is a power to make a desired effect. Why the roll of the dice is not considered a choice if you don't have the clue what will happen if you roll the dice? That's exactly the issue with Witcher 3. A lot of the choices which we take throughout the course of the game is very unpredictable. Like, you don't know firsthand what will these choices will do in the future after you go through the game throughout. A choice between a good and evil is blurred, but the effect of it is not. There is no good and evil choices, but there is certainly a good or evil ending, which is a dynamic that doesn't work together very well. Some of the seemingly good choice ended up creating a bad ending. This does not create a link up between the elements in The Witcher 3, but at the cost of power of choice, like in the Crone's quest, where freeing the children will lead to a bad ending for the Baron. This does make it seem like the world is alive, but it is at the cost of choice. If I don't have the clue of the effect of those choices, or if I should know that the choices are good or bad, why should I contemplate about making a choice? I might as well choose a random options which I don't know which will be good or bad, which would ended up taking away the consequences of this game. This also takes away the role-playing elements of the dialogue and choices that you would barely know if you are playing a good guy or bad guy. Another example would be which is the son of the second wife of the king of Skellig. I don't know how to pronounce, but I am pronouncing Skellig. Ended up being a king who unites and strengthens the Skellig. The second wife is a bitch, and we are led to believe that letting her win is a bad choice, which is not the case. Of course, a twist now and then would spice things up, but when everything is expected to have a twist, it is not great. It loses impact. Also, the moral differences between some of the dialogue choices are so vague that you sometimes choose a dialogue options thinking it would be good, but in case turn out to be very bad. This is not because of the personal concept of good or bad, but because the game fails to communicate properly what is the good dialogue option and what is the bad, what is the consequences beforehand. This is not because the game doesn't differentiate between bad or good choices or difference in choices. It certainly does so, but it utterly fails in communicating it. This is not how every single dialogue box, but there are certainly a lot of them that matters, and it is enough to ruin some kind of an enjoyment I did have with this type of choice and consequences type of RPGs. However, this problem is somewhat non-existent in choices related to CD, which are all well done. In this section, I will be talking about the underutilized fantasy elements. Several fantasy elements in this game, especially the elven ruins and other stuff related to it, are not explored in the game. They are there, and there are missions which are to be played in elven ruins, but the lore is so minimal and story elements are so disconnected to it, which actually communicates to the player that it is not that important. The Witcher is a fantasy genre, and in this game you are rarely experienced all of the fantasy elements except the monsters. Also, there are also no large quest which makes use of and explore the lore of The Witcher 3. There could have been a proper side story about the struggle of the elves, who were the original owners of the land, a large side quest about the ongoing war, a side quest that teaches the eternal fire a lesson. This type of quest would go a long way in making the world feel much more fleshed out. But whenever these topics come up, the game forces you to be a silent observer, even if you do want to interfere and take part in their politics. Also, the interplay of these elements in the main story is quite low. They could have had something like the Redanian forces blocking you at some part of the map, gaining access to critical info about Ciri, for instance, which would have added more to the main story and also give player a taste of difficulties normal people have during this war. But these elements are rarely represented in the main quest or side quest of The Witcher, which were more about personal stories about people. Most of it is detached from the elements of the lore. The lack of communication of the main story elements of that of the story of Geralt and Ciri is some of the most disappointing things about this game. Even though all the storylines and characters of the main story are fully fleshed out and top quality, the story which concerns Geralt and Ciri and the Wild Heart starts only at the last quarter of the game. By that point, you have already completed 3/4 of the main story. Till then, main story consists of stories which would have been side quest with loose connection of Siri, which in most situations executed by characters who afford information about Siri, who might be asking Geralt to do something in exchange. It's so vague in why they are not telling me some important informations I don't understand. So in essence, Geralt is doing their own story for them instead of playing his own story elements. This can be considered a creative choice, but for players who are concerned about what happened to Geralt, Jennifer and Ciri, this could be a counterproductive. There are a lot of people complaining about getting bored after playing it for few hours, more than 10 hours at least. Got bored and stopped playing. This is due to the fact that a lot of the quests in the first half are forced into Geralt and doesn't concern the central narrative of the game, which could have been about chasing down Ciri before the Wild Hunt do so. So in essence, the story which should have felt like a race against the time or a mad chase is delayed and slowed down, and for some people frustrating even if you are concentrated exclusively on the main quest. Also, a lot of the people are introduced to the universe through the game and haven't played the previous game or read the novel. So the lack of knowledge about the context, the game also doesn't provide much context until very late in the game. So for new players, the emotional connection that Geralt has for Ciri is unknown, so they don't feel like that connection and do not feel the need to rescue her as the game strongly expects you to be. They should have given us more time with young Ciri to develop the bond, or at least provide us with flashbacks or something. This is important because otherwise the player cannot grasp the full impact of the story, which would result in several players getting bored. So in essence, the main story is not executed that greatly it is on paper, because the forced break on the story and the delayed pace only picks up very late, and lack of emotional context for this story makes it a bit of a chore to get through. However, out of this lot, this is still one of the best stories in open world games, but not the best. This doesn't mean that CDPR cannot make a good story. In fact, the stories in the two main DLCs are really good and unique, and I believe the story of the Heart of Stone DLC is better than the main story. It's truly original when compared to the stories of other games, and it is also one of the best presented and intriguing and crafty and terrifying entities in gaming history in Gaunter or Demine, aka Master Mirror, who could be a god or a devil in the Witcher 3 universe. Also the central character of the DLC, Olgard von Everec, is also one of the best written characters I've ever encountered in a video game. Let's talk about one of the most annoying aspects of the game, the notice board dilemma. Every location of interest on the map can be located by getting notices from the notice board in the village. Even though this does not bring a level of structure or order to the open world game and make it seem alive and functional, it takes away the need to explore, since you cannot be able to run into something that cannot be found from the notice board, and most of the question marks are automatically placed on the map, so you would know exactly where to go. The notice board should really just stop with the side quest notices and monster contracts. Instead, it lists everything there is to discover, nearly including the location of the places of power where when you know exactly where something is. It also tells you where not to look. In Witcher 3, since you know places without question marks in the map don't have to do with anything, you don't need to go anywhere. You just know on the quest markers. So I will know that exploring a particular area is useless before I even explored it. This completely takes out the exploration elements of Witcher 3's open world. In fact, it's bloody zero. There are quests which are exceptions, but these are extremely rare. In fact, I found only 3 or 4 in my 2 playthroughs of the game. They could have solved this by exposing question marks only if you look where near into it, which would require you to explore in order to find the location of those bandit camps and abandoned buildings. This would greatly improve the open world exploration gameplay. Even games like Skyrim use those mechanics. So I don't know why they chose to do it like this way, in like notice board type of way. That's it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Witcher 3 certainly has cool stuff in its gameplay that is totally awesome. Things like particular decoction which automatically puts up magical shield if a very powerful blow hits you, and things like the resolve abilities. But some of those elements, which seems cool on paper, is practically ineffective in gameplay. Things like Ekimara decoction, which should enable you to steal vitality from your opponents. Specifically, the effects of this particular decoction is so weak that it barely makes any difference. And if you have a certain abilities that enables you to increase the time of effect of food, this decoction has never been used. This is due to the result of bad tuning, probably due to ineffective playtesting. The same is the case for the most of the perks in the skill tree. For example, the maximum effect you can add to your fast attack and strong attack are 50% or 25% increase, which you will need to in order to level up from 8 to 10 levels, so that you can max those two, which is at least 10 hours of gameplay, which is a bit too much for a 25% increase in powers of fast attack and strong attack, which is barely noticeable during gameplay. Let me show you an example which would emphasize how low this is. 25% increase can be achieved by the first upgrade itself in Skyrim. Each ability you unlock or level up improves the adrenaline points generation by 1% each, and a 1% improvement does not feel like powerful at all. Also, the effect of adrenaline points on attack powers also barely noticeable during gameplay. When leveling up, the player should feel more powerful, but in this game it's just on paper. Most of it is barely noticeable in the gameplay. There are places of power in Witcher 3 spread out in an open world can give additional ability points, which is certainly a good thing, which also encourages open world exploration. There are a total of 24 of them, which translates to 24 additional points, which may seem like a lot, but it's barely enough to make up for the slow pace of normal progression. A number of potions and decoction are cancelled out by QN signs, which performs the same function as those decoction. Also, some decoctions are just plain stupid. The werewolf decoction, which eliminates stamina usage outside of the fight, is just so damn useless. Since we have a horse which is adept at traversal, a lot of the potions and decoction are useless in boss fight, as they require you to slay a number of enemies during the fight for it to take effect. A lot of cooler decoctions and potions do not have a noticeable impact on the game due to improvements they provide being just too small to make a difference. A particular decoction works only if the vitality is at 100%, which can work against weaker enemies, but in more challenging fights you are seldom at full vitality, so the decoction is useless when you need it the most. Another decoction accelerates the adrenaline point generation when the first enemy strikes, which again is useless against powerful enemies. The ratio of number of percentage upgrades to new players is mostly negligible. Most of the perks in Witcher 3 skill trees are percentage upgrades, which are a lot when compared to upgrades which give specific powers. The only one adding a bit of depth to the gameplay, by the way. Having new powers as an upgrade is a necessity, as it adds more layers to the combat and would rule out the combat from becoming repetitive as you play for hours. Also, these percentage upgrades are some of the most lame I've seen in AAA RPG space. Really, who would know if their attack power are increased by 5%? A proof of this can be obtained by giving a look at Witcher 3 CDPR forum. It is very divisive. A lot of people claim that particular upgrade is very useful and is a must, while a lot of other people said to avoid the said upgrade as they felt it is useless. Why is that so? My reasoning is that people don't actually experience those upgrades directly during gameplay and assume that it is giving them an edge. Again, I'm not saying that these upgrades are not working, just that their effects or disadvantages or advantages is too meager to notice from the gameplay perspective. Hence, it does not make the player feel more powerful. Let's talk about the lack of proportion of progression system to the length of the game. As I sum up, the actual problem of Witcher 3's progression system is this. The progression system in this 80 plus hour gameplay is designed as if it is a 20-hour game. Then it is stretched out to fill those 80 hours. There are a lot of good things in the progression system, but almost all of them are accessible only till the very end. The mechanics, which actually adds a layer of depth to the game, can be unlocked at least 40 hours of gameplay. At least after 40 hours of gameplay. So you have to trudge through those boring lame ass sections to get to the good parts, which is just too long. And it adds a lot of depth to the combat, but what use are they? They are not available for more than half of the game. Let's talk about one of the most famous aspects about this work. Let's talk about one of the most popular aspects about Witcher 3's world, the open world. A clear majority of the open world elements of Witcher 3 consist of bandit camps, monster nests, and abandoned site, all of which are essentially the same thing. Let me explain. The abandoned camps are very small areas which have number of abandoned in it which turns aggressive when you enter those areas. They are out in the open field and most of them look exactly the same. Kill all the bandits and you have completed the bandit camps. There are chests waiting for you in the camp with goodies once you complete the camps. The monster nests are essentially the bandit camps version of monsters. Abandoned sites are bandit camps or monster nests which shows up in cutscenes, which are just some villagers walking in. After the completion and reward you with one more trader, which can give you special goods. The rewards are good, but they don't make up for the staleness and repetitiveness of these open world elements. Why precisely this is bad is because it will take up elements of surprise and intrigue from discovering new locations in the open world. As your brain tells you, it's probably just another bandit camps. In later games like Assassin's Creed Origins and Odyssey, and in games like Metal Gear Solid 5, even though there are a lot of these bandit camps, all of them are laid out differently, and a slight variation in approach is necessary to conquer them effectively, which also takes more effort and time than in their counterparts. In Witcher 3, this is not the case, so it is heavily repetitive and also lays the land in too plain. There are a really low number of caves, elven ruins in this game, which will give a lot of depth and intrigue to the open world. The joy of exploring a dark, scary cave system or an ancient dungeons is nearly absent in the open world, save for some quest in the main story, which are great, but it's just 2 or 3. An absolute majority of this open world has to offer is repetitive and directly on the surface, literally and figuratively speaking, which takes out the exploration and elements of intrigue out of this game, which is a big blow to this game's open world. There is a certain lack of diversity and narrative in the villages. The villages in Witcher 3 are almost all the same, with same issues, same look, same kind of people. None of the villages have any kind of narrative on its own. No major locales that differentiate it from other places. No issues that plague a certain village as a whole. For a game that praised for its narrative quality, this is a noticeable drawback. Also, the cities of Oxenford also lack any narrative on its own. It's just there, offering just a change of view from the villages. But the city of Novigrad stands out as a direct contrast to all of this. The city is quite well done, with incidents and narratives specific to the problem that the city faces. It also has a feel of its own. A lot of the elements like the Thieves Guild, underground sewer, the occasional external priest, violence, racism, and quite a lot of interesting stuffs. It also has 1 or 2 secrets of its own too. Today I will be talking about one of the more important sections of the game. A clear sign of the lack of proper game design in Witcher 3 is how they treated overpowering. Here, they have seen overpowering itself as a menace and tried to eliminate it by adding options to upscale the enemy level near to that of the player. The problem is that when its option is turned on, the player can never become overpowered, even if they wish to. In many other games, it can be quite satisfying to become an overpowered character. So why is it an issue here? The reason is that in The Witcher 3, the player has almost zero control over when the base stat is increased at each level. This is occupied with being near impossible to predict what level of improvement each level up introduces. Means that the player has no idea when or if they were overpowered or not. Here, overpoweredness is unplanned, unexpected, unwelcome, and uncomfortable. Also, each level up doesn't feel proportionate at all. Just level up once and enemies which are extremely difficult will be quite easy. Instead of coming down to moderate difficult, overpowering can be satisfying when a player invests a lot of time and effort directly in the pursuit of being overpowered. That too with a complete slate of knowledge. In other words, we call this term metagaming. They know how much they are going to be overpowered. It is bizarre how a game which is considered to be the greatest of all time can't even handle something quite as simple as overpowering correctly. In conclusion, in recent years, Witcher 3's hype has gone from being a properly executed open-world fantasy game with great narrative elements to being called the greatest game of all time. This is a bad thing, as this game is certainly not the greatest of all time. In recent years, the culture of overhyping games have become much more prominent. A lot of people call it the greatest RPG of all time. Its RPG elements falls incredibly short. Witcher 3 falls short because of its half-assed RPG progression and skill tree. Not a lot of narrative role-playing, as it's nearly impossible to be a good guy or bad guy. It is on purpose due to unpredictability of consequences and vagueness in difference between dialogues. Some might argue that Witcher 3 greatly makes you feel like a Witcher. This is true for the most part, and I agree with it. But there is another game which is true benchmark of role playing as one particular person, playing as Batman in Arkham series. Witcher 3 does the job in great way, but not as great in role playing as the Batman in the Arkham series. So in what context is Witcher 3 an RPG masterpiece? The one game to rule them all? It certainly is not the best open world game out there, nor is it closely second. The element of exploration is non-existent in Witcher 3. It cannot even match the open world of Skyrim, and I hate Skyrim. You can see my review. So we rule out the open world and RPG mechanics, and also the presentation of lore. Witcher 3 has enough lore but does not reveal it to the players properly in a gradual way. It is a popular opinion that Witcher 3's combat is not that great. The idea that Witcher 3 is an open world RPG masterpiece is a misconception built upon hype. However, it is still a narrative masterpiece. I'm not denying that. Probably has one of the best executed story in a non-linear game till now. It sets the standards on how a company can handle a narrative in video games. The DLC of this game are the most expansive and best ever DLC released even compared to some other games. Witcher 3 set the standards by teaching how an insignificant element be improved by adding narrative into it. It raises the bar for the overall polishness of a video games, which was very depressing until its release. The notion of Witcher 3 being an open world fantasy RPG masterpiece is false though. There are other games that are better at fantasy and lore, better combat, better RPG mechanics, open world mechanics, and in some of these categories, Witcher 3 does not even come close. And it's not a matter of opinion. There are more to the game than just graphics and storytelling. There is a big difference between movies, books, and video games. Books and movies treats you like a silent listener, while video games have the power to put you at the middle of an action as a person who can really influence what is going on him and around her. When I say Witcher 3 is not performing in some aspect, it is specifically because there are other games that does it better. I do not subjugate this game to a lofty expectations, which have never reached before. The perfect game doesn't exist, and I certainly do not hope Witcher 3 to be a perfect game. Not at all. The Witcher 3's open world was significantly better than those other games when released, but its open world has been matched in quality by several games. You don't even have to look that far. Even Morrowind has better open world game than Witcher 3. Play Morrowind or games like Gothic, and you will see the vast quality of difference in terms of level progression, exploration, and structure of the open world. Witcher 3 was never an RPG masterpiece given at release. Witcher 3 do have a massive potential which can be unlocked with a bit of a modding and fine tuning. I hope to play with some mods later in future.